Hey everyone, tonight we're going to look at what the research actually says happens inside the human body when you vape. If you appreciate videos like this, feel free to subscribe and like the video. It's the best way to support the channel. And I'm curious, let me know in the comments with a simple yes or no. Do you think the average person knows what's actually in an e-cigarette? Now before we begin, put the phone on silent and maybe grab a comfy blanket, and let's get started. You are witness to the arrival of a Trojan horse. It does not appear as a wooden beast at the gates of a city, but as a ghost, a plume of ethereal white vapor drawn past the lips. The cloud is deceptively cool, carrying with it a synthetic sweetness engineered to disarm. This is not smoke, born of fire and combustion, but an aerosol, a complex suspension of ultrafine particles and chemical droplets meticulously designed for deep infiltration. As it fills the mouth, you observe the first contact, a subtle coating that slicks the surfaces of the tongue and palate. This residue is propylene glycol, a humectant, a substance designed to carry moisture and flavor, but here its action is more insidious. It lays a thin synthetic film over taste buds that are built to discern the natural world of sugars, salts and acids, cloaking the chemical payload in a guise of familiarity, a phantom echo of fruit or mint. The aerosol, dense and heavy with its unseen cargo, begins its journey inward. You watch as it drifts past the uvula, the small sentinel at the back of the throat. Here, another layer of deception is deployed. Contained within this fog are flavorings and anesthetic compounds, chemicals like menthol or eugenol, whose purpose extends beyond taste. They impart a cooling sensation, a deliberate chemical trick that numbs the tissues of the pharynx and larynx, suppressing the body's first line of defense, the cough reflex. A cough is a violent protective explosion, the body's way of expelling an intruder. This vapor, however, has been engineered to be a silent invader, to bypass this alarm system by soothing the very nerves that would trigger it. The irritation is present, a low-level chemical burn beginning on the delicate mucous membranes, but it is masked, unregistered by the brain's threat detection centers. The guard has been neutralized, not by force, but by a chemical lullaby. The cloud sinks lower, a ghostly fog descending into the trachea, the windpipe. This wide tube is lined with a microscopic defense system of breathtaking elegance, the mucociliary escalator. You see it now, a vast field of cilia, tiny hair-like projections, beating in a coordinated rhythmic wave. Their purpose is to move a thin blanket of mucus ever upward, trapping inhaled dust, pollen, and bacteria, and transporting this debris out of the lungs to be swallowed and neutralized in the stomach. But as the aerosol washes over this vibrant, living surface, you witness a profound disruption. The chemical constituents of the vapor, particularly acrolein, a volatile aldehyde, formed from the heating of glycerin, act as a paralytic agent. The rhythmic, unified beat of the cilia falters, slows, and in some regions, ceases entirely. They become bogged down, their coordinated dance disrupted by the sticky residue, their cellular machinery poisoned. The escalator grinds to a halt. Debris that should be cleared now remains, trapped in a thickening slurry of mucus and chemical film, creating a stagnant swamp where pathogens can thrive. The invasion is now proceeding with unnerving ease, the primary defenses having been systematically disarmed. The aerosol is not a single substance, but a complex cocktail, a chemical soup heated to a point of vaporization and then rapidly cooled into this stable suspension. Within each microscopic droplet, you would find a universe of compounds. There is the nicotine, of course, the primary psychoactive agent, but it is accompanied by a host of other chemicals, each with its own role in the assault. There are volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, like benzene and formaldehyde, known carcinogens that have been carried over from the chemical flavorings and the thermal decomposition of the liquid. There are heavy metals, microscopic fragments of nickel, tin and lead leached from the heating coil itself, now suspended in the fog, ready to be deposited deep within the body's most delicate tissues. The sheer complexity of this chemical mixture is a challenge the body's defenses were never evolved to meet. It is not a single enemy, but an army, each platoon with its own specialized method of attack. You follow the main column of the aerosol as it reaches a critical junction, the carina, where the trachea bifurcates, splitting into the two main bronchi, one for each lung. The journey becomes one of division and subdivision, the vapor flowing into ever smaller and more intimate passageways. From the main bronchi to the lobar bronchi, then to the segmental bronchi, and onward into the bronchioles, the architecture of the lung unfolds like the branches of a vast inverted tree. With each division, the velocity of the aerosol slows, allowing more of its particulate matter to fall out of suspension, to adhere to the walls of these narrowing tubes. The coating you first witnessed in the mouth now builds up layer by layer deep within the chest, a persistent, irritating film that the paralyzed cilia can no longer clear. The body's response is inflammation, a primal and ancient defense. Immune cells are summoned to the area, but they are confused. They are prepared to fight bacteria or viruses, not a persistent chemical residue. Their response becomes frustrated, chronic, a low-grade state of alarm that begins to damage the very tissues they are supposed to protect. The airway walls begin to thicken and swell, a condition you would recognize as bronchitis, the body's attempt to isolate the chemical irritant. The passage of air becomes more difficult, a subtle but persistent narrowing of the vital conduits for breath. The final destination of this journey is now close. The aerosol cloud, thinner now but no less potent, penetrates into the deepest, most sacred spaces of the lung, the respiratory zone. It filters into the terminal bronchioles, and finally, into the alveolar ducts, which open into the microscopic clusters of sacs known as the alveoli. There are approximately 300 million of these delicate, balloon-like structures in your lungs, their combined surface area vast enough to cover a tennis court. This is the sanctum of gas exchange, the place where life itself crosses a membrane. The walls of these sacs are astonishingly thin, a single cell thick, to allow for the effortless diffusion of oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide out of it. They are designed for nothing else. They are built for air, for the pure, simple gases that have sustained vertebrate life for eons. What you are about to witness is the desecration of this sacred space, the arrival of the chemical siege in the heart of the respiratory system. The Trojan horse has not just breached the gates, it has reached the citadel's innermost chamber, and its contents are about to be unleashed. The warm, moist, and impossibly delicate environment of the alveoli is about to be flooded with a synthetic fog it was never meant to encounter. The consequences of this meeting will ripple through every system of the body. The invasion is complete. The siege is about to begin. You are now inside the alveolar sac, a space of profound biological importance. The air here is warm and still, saturated with moisture. The walls around you, composed of type 1 pneumocytes, are stretched thin, a gossamer membrane separating the air you are in from the rush of blood in the capillaries just beyond. You can almost perceive the rhythmic pulse of life on the other side. This is a place of quiet, efficient exchange, the very nexus of respiration. But the quiet is broken. The chemical fog you have been following now billows into this delicate chamber, displacing the clean air. It is a ghostly intrusion, a synthetic mist rolling into a pristine natural environment. The ultrafine particles, many of them smaller than 2.5 microns in diameter, are so minuscule that they behave more like a gas than a solid, allowing them to penetrate this deep into the lung. They do not settle quickly, but remain suspended, a lingering, spectral presence in the sac. You witness the first interaction between the aerosol and the alveolar surface, a substance called surfactant, a complex lipoprotein mixture, coats the inner lining of the alveoli. Its purpose is crucial to reduce surface tension, preventing these delicate sacs from collapsing upon exhalation. As the chemical droplets of propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin land, they begin to dissolve this vital surfactant layer. You see the integrity of the layer compromised, its surface tension properties altered by the synthetic solvents. The slick, chemical coating you observed in the upper airways now forms here, in a place where any barrier, any change in physical properties, can have catastrophic consequences for breathing. This interference is a direct assault on the mechanics of respiration itself, making each breath a little less efficient, forcing the lungs to work harder to remain inflated. The body must now produce more surfactant to compensate, an expenditure of energy to counteract a chemical disruption. It is the beginning of a long and draining war of attrition, fought on a microscopic battlefield. Now you observe the body's first responders arriving at the scene. They are the alveolar macrophages, the dust cells of the lungs. These are large, specialized immune cells whose entire existence is dedicated to patrolling the alveolar surfaces, engulfing any foreign particles that manage to make it this deep, be it a speck of dust, a bacterium, or a fungal spore. As the aerosol fills the space, the macrophages are activated, summoned to deal with this massive influx of foreign material. You see one of these cells approach a microscopic droplet of the aerosol fluid. Its cellular membrane extends, attempting to envelop the foreign object in a process called phagocytosis. But this is not a simple bacterium. This is a complex chemical sphere. As the macrophage engulfs the droplet, its internal machinery is confronted with a payload of cytotoxic chemicals. The volatile organic compounds and heavy metals within the droplet act as direct poisons to the macrophage itself. You are witnessing the suicide of a defender. The macrophage, its internal mechanisms failing, undergoes a process called apoptosis, or programmed cell death. However, the chemical stress is so great that many of them rupture in a more violent, uncontrolled manner, known as necrosis. When a macrophage dies this way, it spills its own potent internal contents into the delicate alveolar space. This includes a host of powerful enzymes and inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines. These cytokines are chemical alarms, distress signals that scream for reinforcements. They are a call to arms for the entire immune system, signaling a massive breach and a severe threat. The result is a dramatic escalation of the inflammatory response you witnessed in the larger airways. The initial, confused attempt to fight an unrecognized enemy now becomes a full-blown, panicked assault. The body is now attacking itself. Vast numbers of neutrophils, another type of aggressive immune cell, are summoned from the bloodstream. They flood into the alveolar sacs, releasing their own highly corrosive enzymes and reactive oxygen species, substances designed to destroy pathogens. But in this context, they begin to digest the delicate single-cell thick walls of the alveoli themselves. You are watching the development of a chemical pneumonitis. This is not an infection, but a sterile, chemical-induced inflammation of the lung tissue. The walls of the alveoli, under attack from both the aerosol's chemicals and the body's own hyperactive immune response, become damaged and leaky. The gossamer-thin barrier between air and blood is breached. You can now see plasma, the liquid component of blood, seeping from the capillaries into the alveolar sac itself. The chamber, designed only for gas, begins to fill with fluid. This is the microscopic equivalent of a flood, an internal drowning. The presence of this fluid drastically reduces the efficiency of gas exchange. Oxygen molecules can no longer diffuse easily into the blood, and carbon dioxide struggles to escape. The body is being slowly starved of oxygen, not from a lack of air, but from the destruction of the interface where oxygen enters the internal world. This oxygen deprivation is called hypoxia, and its effects will soon be felt by every organ and tissue in the body. The damage is not uniform. Some alveoli are flooded, while others are merely inflamed, their surfaces scarred and thickened by the chronic battle. You witness the body's attempt at repair. Fibroblast cells are activated, and they begin to lay down collagen, the same fibrous protein that makes up scar tissue. In a desperate attempt to heal the chemical burns and inflammatory lesions, the body begins to reinforce the alveolar walls. But this is a tragic miscalculation. The result is a stiffening of the once pliable and elastic lung tissue, a condition known as pulmonary fibrosis. The delicate, balloon-like sacs become rigid and scarred. They can no longer expand and contract with ease. The lungs as a whole lose their natural spongy compliance, becoming more like brittle, inelastic structures. Each breath now requires a significant, conscious effort. The effortless act of breathing has been turned into a laborious, mechanical struggle against the body's own scar tissue. This entire process, from the disruption of the surfactant to the scarring of the tissue, is a cascade of events initiated by that single puff. It is a story of a defense system turned against itself, of a healing process that causes more harm than good. The long-term consequences are now being written into the very architecture of the lungs. The lingering chemical residue, ensures that the inflammation never truly resolves. The paralyzed cilia in the upper airways allow for a continuous influx of new irritants and a buildup of mucus, creating a perfect breeding ground for secondary bacterial infections, which will only compound the existing damage. The siege within the lungs has resulted in a devastating breach. The enemy is no longer at the gates, it is inside, and it has crippled the citadel's primary defense, turning it into a source of chronic self-perpetuating injury. The very air sacs that are meant to give life are now filling with fluid and turning to scar. The point of no return is fast approaching, as the most potent chemicals in the aerosol prepare to cross the now damaged barrier and enter the superhighway of the bloodstream, transforming a localized siege into a systemic war. You are positioned at the critical interface, the alveolar capillary membrane. This barrier, even in its healthy state, is almost unimaginably thin, less than a micron across. It is here that the external world, in the form of oxygen, is permitted entry into the sterile internal world of the bloodstream. You have just witnessed this barrier being compromised, made leaky and inflamed by the chemical assault and the body's subsequent chaotic immune response. Now you will witness the consequence of that breach, the systemic invasion. The aerosol's most potent and mobile components are about to cross this damaged frontier and gain access to the entire body. The point of no return has been reached. The siege is no longer a localized conflict confined to the lungs. It is about to become a body-wide war. The circulatory system, the river of life, is about to be turned into a high-speed delivery network for a host of toxic agents. The first to cross is nicotine. You observe a single nicotine molecule, small and lipophilic, meaning it dissolves easily in fats. This chemical property allows it to slip through the damaged cell membranes of the alveolar wall and the capillary endothelium with incredible ease. Within seconds of the aerosol being inhaled, a concentrated wave of nicotine hits the pulmonary circulation. From the lungs, this nicotine-rich blood is swept directly to the heart, specifically to the left atrium and ventricle, and is then pumped with tremendous force into the aorta, the body's largest artery. This entire process is terrifyingly efficient. A drug injected into a vein in the arm can take up to 15 seconds to reach the brain. This inhaled nicotine will complete the journey in less than 7. It is the most rapid and effective method of drug delivery known, a chemical blitzkrieg that overwhelms the body's defenses before they can even register the nature of the threat. But nicotine does not travel alone. You watch as other, even more insidious passengers make the crossing. The ultrafine particles you saw lingering in the alveolar sacs, the microscopic fragments of heavy metals like lead, nickel, and cadmium, are small enough to squeeze through the gaps in the damaged, leaky capillary walls. They are now free in the bloodstream, foreign, solid objects that have no biological purpose and cannot be broken down. They will circulate endlessly, like tiny abrasive grains of sand flowing through the most delicate and intricate plumbing imaginable. You also see the volatile organic compounds, the formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, dissolving directly into the blood plasma. These are highly reactive molecules, chemical agents that will now be transported to every organ, every tissue, and every cell in the body. The blood, which should be carrying only oxygen, nutrients, and life-sustaining hormones, has been contaminated. It has become a toxic slurry, a carrier of poisons. The invasion is now total and systemic. You follow this contaminated blood as it is propelled from the heart. The first destination of this toxic tide is the most sensitive and critical organ of all, the brain. The arteries leading from the heart to the brain, the carotid and vertebral arteries, carry this chemical payload directly to the command center of the body. The sheer speed of this delivery is key to the profound and immediate effects of the act. The brain is protected by a highly selective barrier of its own, the blood-brain barrier, a tightly controlled gateway designed to keep out toxins and pathogens. But nicotine is a master infiltrator. Its chemical structure allows it to pass through this barrier as if it were not even there. The brain, the seat of consciousness, thought, and control, is now directly exposed to a powerful neuroactive drug delivered in a massive pulsatile dose. This is not a gentle influence. It is a chemical shockwave, an artificial signal that will hijack the brain's most fundamental operating systems. Simultaneously, The rest of the body is receiving its own share of the toxic shipment. You trace the path of the blood as it flows down the aorta and branches out to supply the other vital organs. The kidneys, the body's sophisticated filtration plants, are now being perfused with blood containing heavy metals they cannot excrete and volatile organic compounds that damage their delicate filtering structures. The nephrons, the liver, the primary detoxification center, receives a surge of chemicals it must now attempt to metabolize, a process that itself can create even more harmful byproducts. The spleen, a key organ of the immune system, is exposed to agents that will trigger further, widespread inflammation. The very bones, which house the marrow where new blood cells are born, are bathed in this contaminated fluid. No system is spared. Every corner of the internal landscape is now under direct chemical assault. The consequences of this systemic exposure will take longer to manifest than the immediate neurological effects, but they will be pervasive and devastatingly thorough. Back in the bloodstream itself, you observe the immediate impact on the blood components. The endothelial cells, the single layer of cells that form the inner lining of all blood vessels, from the mighty aorta to the tiniest capillary, are the first to encounter the circulating toxins. These cells are not merely a passive lining, they are a dynamic, metabolically active organ that controls the relaxation and constriction of the blood vessel, regulates clotting, and manages inflammation. You see the circulating nicotine and free radicals begin to inflict direct damage on this delicate endothelial lining. The smooth, frictionless surface becomes inflamed and sticky. This condition, known as endothelial dysfunction, is the first step in the development of atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of the arteries. The foundation for future cardiovascular catastrophe is being laid with every puff, with every wave of toxins that washes through the circulatory system. The high-speed delivery network has not only transported the enemy throughout the body, the network itself is now becoming one of the primary casualties of the war. The river of life is being poisoned, and its own banks are beginning to erode and decay from the inside out. This single crossing has transformed a respiratory problem into a crisis for the entire organism. You have followed the chemical surge into the brain, the sanctum of identity and control. Here, within this 3-pound universe of 100 billion neurons, the nicotine molecule begins its work of espionage and sabotage. Its primary target is one of the most ancient and fundamental signaling systems in the brain, the cholinergic system. Specifically, nicotine is a molecular mimic. It has a shape so similar to a natural neurotransmitter called acetylcholine that it can fit perfectly into the acetylcholine receptors, like a master key slipping into a lock that was not designed for it. These receptors, officially known as nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, are scattered throughout the brain, and they are involved in a vast array of functions, including muscle contraction, memory, learning, and attention. You are about to witness a chemical hijacking of this critical infrastructure. As the wave of nicotine washes over the neurons in a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, it binds to these receptors. The VTA is a crucial hub in the brain's reward and motivation circuitry. When acetylcholine normally binds to these receptors, it sends a carefully modulated signal. But nicotine is not a subtle natural messenger. It is a powerful imposter, an agonist that throws the lock open with brute force, causing the neuron to fire with an abnormal intensity and duration. This artificial stimulation triggers a massive, unnatural release of another, more famous neurotransmitter, dopamine. You see the VTA neurons flooding a neighboring brain region, the nucleus accumbens, with a deluge of dopamine. This is the heart of the brain's reward system. The nucleus accumbens is designed to process pleasure and reinforce behaviors that are essential for survival, such as eating, drinking, and procreating. It is the part of the brain that says, "That was good, do that again." This flood of dopamine is not pleasure in the true sense of the word. It is a chemical distortion, a forgery of a survival signal. The brain is being tricked into believing that inhaling the aerosol is an act of profound biological importance. This powerful, artificial reinforcement is the foundation of the addiction. The brain begins to associate the act of vaping with this intense, chemically induced reward signal, creating a powerful, conditioned response. The cues associated with the act, the The sight of the device, the smell of the flavor, the sensation in the throat become triggers capable of inducing a powerful craving, a neurological demand to repeat the behavior and receive the dopamine surge. You are not witnessing a choice. You are witnessing the laying of neurological railroad tracks, the forging of a powerful compulsion that will eventually override rational thought and conscious control. The user is not choosing to continue. Their brain is being reprogrammed to demand it. The consequences of this hijacking extend beyond addiction. The constant, unnatural overstimulation of the nicotinic receptors leads to a process of neuroadaptation. The brain, in a desperate attempt to regain balance and turn down the volume of this artificial shouting, begins to downregulate. It reduces the number of available acetylcholine receptors on the surface of its neurons. You can see it happening, the receptors being pulled into the cell rendered inactive. Paradoxically, this makes the brain less sensitive to nicotine, a phenomenon known as tolerance. The user now needs to inhale more nicotine, more frequently, to achieve the same dopamine flood. At the same time, the brain becomes less sensitive to its own natural acetylcholine, leading to a state of withdrawal when nicotine is absent. The user feels irritable, anxious, and unable to concentrate, because their brain now has a deficit of cholinergic signaling. The artificial stimulant has become necessary just to feel normal. The addiction has taken root, not as a search for a high, but as a desperate flight from the low of withdrawal. Furthermore, this chemical reprogramming has profound effects on cognitive function, particularly in the developing brain. You observe the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, planning and impulse control. This area is still under construction until the mid-20s, and it is exquisitely sensitive to the effects of nicotine. The flood of dopamine and the disruption of the cholinergic system interfere with the normal development of synaptic connections in this region. The process of synaptic pruning, where the brain strategically eliminates weaker connections to strengthen more important ones, is thrown into disarray. The result is a long-term impairment of the ability to focus attention, control impulses, and make sound judgments. The very architecture of rational thought is being altered, compromised by a chemical that has been delivered with such devastating efficiency. The command center is not just under siege, it is being rewired, its development diverted, its future capabilities diminished. This entire neurological event is a silent coup. There is no overt violence, no physical destruction you can see with the naked eye, but the damage is profound and insidious. It is a corruption of the brain's most fundamental motivational systems, a reprogramming of its learning and memory pathways. The artificial signal of the nicotine has become more compelling than the brain's own natural signals. The desire to repeat the act is no longer a simple wish. It is a neurological imperative, driven by a deep, chemically carved pathway in the core of the brain. The user may believe they are in control, but you, as the witness to this microscopic takeover, can see the truth. The brain's reward system, the very compass that should guide a person toward survival and well-being, has been seized by a chemical imposter. It now points insistently, relentlessly, toward the source of its own corruption. The foundation for a lifetime of struggle has been laid in a matter of seconds. The siege of the command center is complete, and the orders it now issues will serve only the addiction it has been forced to create. The journey continues, away from the immediate high drama of the neurological coup, and into the slower, more methodical destruction occurring throughout the body's vast cardiovascular network. You are now inside a major coronary artery, one of the vital vessels that feeds the heart muscle itself. The blood flowing here is no longer the pristine river it should be. It is the same toxic slurry you witnessed entering the systemic circulation, rich in nicotine, heavy metals, and the byproducts of inflammation. You are about to witness how this chronic chemical exposure wages a war of attrition against the heart and its lifelines, a process that is patient, relentless, and ultimately lethal. The focus here is not on a sudden shock, but on a gradual, creeping corrosion, a slow stiffening that transforms flexible, living vessels into rigid, brittle pipes. This is the long game of the chemical siege, the systemic assault on the engine of life. Your attention is drawn to the inner lining of the artery, the endothelium. You have already seen it become inflamed and dysfunctional. Now you observe the long-term consequences of this state. The persistent presence of nicotine in the blood, has a direct effect on the sympathetic nervous system, the body's fight or flight control system. Nicotine stimulates the adrenal glands, located atop the kidneys, to release a surge of epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. This powerful hormone courses through the bloodstream, and you see its immediate effect on the artery. The smooth muscle in the arterial wall constricts, causing the entire vessel to narrow, a process called vasoconstriction. Simultaneously, the epinephrine drives the heart to beat faster and with more force. The heart is being whipped into a state of high alert, forced to pump blood with greater pressure through arteries that are now narrower. This is the definition of high blood pressure, or hypertension. With each puff, this cycle repeats, a momentary spike in blood pressure. Over time, with repeated exposure, this becomes a chronic condition. The arterial walls, constantly under elevated pressure, begin to sustain damage. You can see the microscopic tears and lesions forming in the endothelial lining, a result of the sheer mechanical stress of the hypertension, compounded by the direct chemical damage from the circulating toxins. The body's repair mechanisms are called to the scene. Platelets, the tiny cells responsible for clotting, begin to aggregate at the sites of injury. Low-density lipoprotein, or LDL cholesterol, often referred to as bad cholesterol, begins to seep through the damaged endothelium and accumulate within the arterial wall. The body's immune cells, the macrophages you saw in the lungs, are summoned here as well. They follow the LDL cholesterol into the vessel wall, engulfing it in an attempt to clear it away. In the process, these macrophages become bloated with fatty substances, transforming into what are known as foam cells. The accumulation of these dead and dying foam cells, along with cholesterol, calcium, and other cellular debris, forms a lesion known as an atherosclerotic plaque. You are witnessing the birth of atherosclerosis, the silent killer. This plaque is not a simple scab. It is a growing inflammatory mass within the wall of the artery. As it grows, it bulges into the lumen, the open channel of the vessel, progressively narrowing the path for blood flow. The heart muscle, downstream from this growing obstruction, is slowly being starved of the oxygen and nutrients it needs to function. This can lead to chest pain or angina, particularly during times of exertion when the heart's demand for oxygen increases. But the greatest danger lies in the stability of the plaque itself. The same inflammatory chemicals that helped create the plaque also work to break down the fibrous cap that covers it. You see the plaque becoming more fragile, more unstable. All it takes is another surge in blood pressure, another wave of inflammatory molecules, for this cap to rupture. When it ruptures, the contents of the plaque are exposed to the blood, and the body's clotting system is activated on a massive scale. A large blood clot, or thrombus, forms rapidly on top of the ruptured plaque. If this clot is large enough, it can completely occlude the artery. The flow of blood is stopped entirely. The section of heart muscle supplied by that artery is now completely cut off from its oxygen supply. The cells of the heart muscle begin to suffocate and die. This is a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. You have just witnessed the entire chain of events, from the initial chemical damage to the endothelium to the final catastrophic blockage. It is a slow-motion catastrophe, a process that can take years to develop, but its origins are right here, in the chemical components of the aerosol that was inhaled. The stiffening of the arteries is not just about plaque. The chronic inflammation and the constant exposure to nicotine also cause a process called arterial stiffening. The elastic fibers in the arterial walls are replaced by stiffer collagen, making the vessels less able to expand and contract in response to the pulse of blood from the heart. The entire arterial tree loses its compliance, its youthful flexibility. The heart is now forced to work even harder, pumping against a rigid, unyielding system, which in turn accelerates the damage to the heart muscle itself, leading to conditions like left ventricular hypertrophy, an enlargement and thickening of the heart's main pumping chamber. This enlarged heart is not stronger. It is a stressed, inefficient muscle prone to failure. The chemical siege has turned the body's own circulatory system into a closed loop of self-destruction, where every beat of the heart contributes to its own eventual demise. From the besieged cardiovascular system, your forensic journey now descends into the realm of the body's defense network, the immune system. This is not a single organ, but a diffuse and complex web of cells, tissues, and chemical messengers that protect the body from foreign invaders like bacteria, viruses, and fungi. You are about to witness how the chronic chemical exposure from vaping systematically undermines this intricate system, creating a state of perpetual low-grade civil war. The result is a paradox: an immune system that is simultaneously overactive and less effective, a state of dysregulation that leaves the body vulnerable not only to outside threats, but also to attacks from within. The chemical siege does not just invite new enemies, it confuses the palace guard and encourages it to set fire to the palace. Your focus is on a state you have seen before, but now you will appreciate its systemic consequences. That state is chronic inflammation. You saw it begin in the lungs, a localized response to the aerosol. You saw it contribute to the formation of plaques in the arteries. Now you must understand that this inflammation is body-wide. The circulating toxins and the signaling molecules released from the initial sites of injury keep the entire immune system in a constant state of low-level alert. It is like an army that is perpetually mobilized for a war that has no front lines and no clear enemy. This constant state of readiness is incredibly draining on the body's resources. It also means that vast numbers of inflammatory cells, like neutrophils and lymphocytes, are constantly circulating in the blood and infiltrating tissues throughout the body, ready to respond to the slightest provocation. You observe a population of T cells, a type of lymphocyte that acts as one of the main orchestrators of the immune response. Nicotine, which you have seen bind to receptors in the brain, also binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors found on the surface of these T cells. This binding directly alters their function. It suppresses the ability of certain T cells to mount an effective response against new pathogens. The commanders of the immune army are being chemically influenced, their judgment impaired. So, when a genuine threat, like an influenza virus or a pneumonia bacterium, enters the body, the immune response is slower and less robust. The body's ability to fight off common infections is compromised. The same paralyzed cilia in the lungs that allow irritants in also create a welcoming environment for these pathogens, and the hobbled immune system is less capable of clearing them out. This is why respiratory infections are often more frequent and more severe in individuals who vape. The defenses are down, the gates left unguarded. At the same time that the immune system is becoming less effective at fighting external threats, its overactive inflammatory state can cause it to turn against the body itself. You are witnessing the seeds of autoimmune disease being sown. In a healthy immune system, there are powerful mechanisms of self-tolerance that prevent immune cells from attacking the body's own healthy tissues. But in this state of chronic, chemically driven inflammation, these mechanisms begin to break down. The constant presence of cellular damage and inflammatory signals can cause the immune system to become confused. It starts to see healthy, normal cells as foreign threats. You can see immune cells beginning to attack the cells of the thyroid gland, the joints, or the lining of the gut. The body's defenders have become mutineers, launching misguided attacks on loyal citizens. This friendly fire contributes to a wide range of inflammatory diseases, conditions that are driven not by an external pathogen, but by a dysregulated and self-destructive immune response. This state of immune confusion is further compounded by the aerosol's effect on the oral microbiome. You return to the mouth, the point of entry. The chemical residue you saw coating the tongue and gums alters the delicate balance of the trillions of bacteria that live there. The synthetic sweeteners and propylene glycol favor the growth of inflammatory types of bacteria, while killing off the beneficial species that help maintain oral health. This shift in the microbial community leads to increased inflammation in the gums, a condition known as gingivitis, which can progress to more severe periodontitis. But the problem does not stay in the mouth. This inflamed oral tissue becomes a constant source of inflammatory bacteria and their byproducts, which can enter the bloodstream through bleeding gums. These bacteria and their toxins then circulate throughout the body, adding yet another layer of inflammatory stimulus to an already overburdened system. The mouth becomes a persistent internal source of pro-inflammatory signals, further fueling the systemic fire. The ultimate consequence of this long-term immune dysregulation is a state of what is called immunosenescence, or the premature aging of the immune system. The constant demand to produce inflammatory cells and respond to chronic low-grade threats exhausts the body's reserves. The bone marrow, where new immune cells are born, becomes less productive. The existing pool of immune cells becomes skewed towards older, less effective memory cells, and away from the naive cells needed to respond to new threats. The immune system, in essence, grows old before its time. It is a system that is both tired and trigger-happy, ineffective against real infections, but prone to fits of destructive, inflammatory rage against itself. The chemical siege has not just damaged organs directly, it has systematically dismantled the very system designed to protect and defend them. The body is left in a state of profound vulnerability, with a weakened defense against the outside world and a rising tide of rebellion from within. This silent systemic assault has turned the guardian into an aggressor and the body into its own battlefield. You must now journey deeper still, beyond the level of organs and systems, to the fundamental unit of life itself, the cell. Every consequence you have witnessed so far, the inflammation in the lungs, the stiffening of the arteries, the confusion of the immune system, ultimately originates from damage that occurs at this microscopic scale. You are about to enter the cellular environment and witness a process of profound and pervasive molecular sabotage known as oxidative stress. This is not an attack with a visible weapon, but a silent, relentless theft of stability, an unraveling of biological molecules that leads to errors in the body's most fundamental code. This is the heart of the chemical siege's long-term strategy, to corrupt the body from the inside out, one molecule at a time. You are now inside the cytoplasm of a single endothelial cell, one of the cells lining the artery you were observing earlier. It is a bustling, complex environment, filled with organelles performing the intricate tasks of life, but it is being flooded with intruders. The volatile organic compounds you saw cross from the lungs into the bloodstream, chemicals like formaldehyde and acrolein, are diffusing through the cell's outer membrane. These molecules, along with the heavy metals, are potent generators of a class of chemical terrorists known as free radicals. A free radical is a highly unstable molecule that is missing an electron in its outer shell. This makes it desperately, aggressively reactive. It will steal an electron from any nearby molecule to regain its own stability. You are about to see the chaos this causes. You watch as a free radical, a hydroxyl radical, generated by the cell's interaction with a heavy metal ion, encounters a lipid molecule in the cell membrane. In an instant, the free radical rips an electron away from the lipid. The lipid molecule is now itself a free radical, and it in turn steals an electron from its neighboring lipid. A chain reaction, a cascade of theft is initiated, spreading like wildfire through the cell membrane. This process, called lipid peroxidation, damages the integrity of the membrane, making it stiff and leaky. The cell's protective barrier is being compromised, its contents vulnerable. The same process attacks the proteins that act as enzymes and structural components, changing their shape and destroying their function. The delicate, precision machinery of the cell is being systematically corroded by this molecular vandalism. The most catastrophic damage, however, occurs when these free radicals penetrate the nucleus, the cell's command center, which houses its genetic blueprint, the deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. You follow a free radical as it nears the iconic double helix. The DNA molecule is a vast library of information, the code that instructs the cell how to function, how to repair itself, and when to replicate. The free radical attacks, stealing an electron from one of the DNA's nucleotide bases. This creates a lesion, a break in the code. You are witnessing the formation of a DNA adduct, a piece of the DNA that has been chemically modified and damaged. The cell has sophisticated machinery to repair such damage, but the assault is relentless. The sheer volume of free radicals generated by the chronic exposure to the aerosol's chemicals overwhelms these repair systems. Some damage is missed, some repairs are made incorrectly. The cell now carries a mutation, a permanent error in its genetic instructions. When this cell divides, as endothelial cells do to repair the vessel lining, it will copy this error into its daughter cells. A lineage of corrupted cells is born. If the mutation occurs in a gene that controls cell growth, a tumor suppressor gene like P53, for example, the cell may lose its ability to stop dividing. It may ignore the signals that tell it to die when it becomes old or damaged. You are witnessing the very first step in the development of cancer. The chemical siege is not just poisoning the body in the present, it is planting malignant seeds that may lie dormant for years or decades before growing into a life-threatening tumor. Cancers of the lung, bladder, esophagus, and mouth have all been linked to the carcinogens present in the chemical aerosol, and this process of oxidative stress and DNA damage is the primary mechanism. This oxidative stress is a unifying source of pathology. It is the underlying driver of the inflammation you have seen throughout the body. Damaged cells release signals that attract immune cells, perpetuating the cycle of inflammation. It is the driver of the endothelial dysfunction. The damage to the lipids and proteins in the arterial lining is what initiates the process of atherosclerosis. It is even a driver of the neurodegeneration in the brain. The brain is incredibly metabolically active and consumes a vast amount of oxygen, making it particularly vulnerable to oxidative stress, which can damage neurons and contribute to cognitive decline over the long term. This one process, this invisible theft of electrons, connects almost all the different forms of damage you have seen. It is the common denominator in the body's systemic failure. The body is not without defenses against oxidative stress. It produces its own antioxidants, like glutathione, to neutralize free radicals. But the chemical siege introduces a volume of oxidants that far outstrips the body's natural antioxidant capacity. The balance is tipped decisively in favor of destruction. The body's reserves of antioxidants are depleted in the constant, losing battle against the flood of free radicals. The cell is left in a state of chronic, unresolved oxidative stress. Its structures are corroding, its machinery is failing, and its fundamental code is being corrupted. This is the true nature of the siege within a slow, molecular unraveling, a quiet and patient process of cellular sabotage that undermines the very foundation of health and paves the way for the chronic diseases that define the body's new compromised state. The war is being won by the invaders at the most fundamental level imaginable. Having witnessed the assault at the cellular level, your forensic journey now returns to a broader view, to observe the cumulative impact on the cardiovascular system. You have already seen the mechanisms of hypertension and atherosclerosis being set in motion. Now you will observe the long-term consequences as these processes mature, solidifying into chronic, life-altering conditions. The heart and the vast network of blood vessels are settling into a new, dysfunctional normal. This is not about a sudden acute event, but about the grim, established reality of a system forced to operate under constant duress. The focus is on the permanent remodeling of this vital architecture, the stiffening and scarring that becomes the new baseline for the body's internal landscape. You return your gaze to the aorta, the great artery branching from the heart. Years of chronic hypertension and endothelial damage have left their mark. The vessel wall, which should be resilient and elastic, has become discernibly thicker and more rigid. You can see the extensive deposits of collagen that have replaced the supple elastin fibers, a process accelerated by the chronic inflammation you witnessed earlier. This is arteriosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries, a condition distinct from but related to the atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaques. Imagine the difference between a flexible hose and a brittle clay pipe. The aorta has lost its ability to act as a windkessel, or an elastic reservoir that absorbs the pressure wave from each heartbeat and smooths out blood flow. Now, with each contraction of the left ventricle, a harsh, high-pressure pulse wave is sent jarring through the rigid arterial tree. This unbuffered pressure wave has devastating consequences upstream and downstream. Upstream, the heart is forced to work against this unyielding resistance. You observe the left ventricle of the heart muscle itself. To overcome the high pressure in the stiffened aorta, the muscle of this chamber has had to thicken and enlarge, a condition you previously identified as left ventricular hypertrophy. At first, this is a compensatory mechanism, but over time, this overgrown muscle becomes a liability. It is so thick that the coronary arteries struggle to supply it with enough oxygen, especially its inner layers. The muscle becomes stiff and less able to relax between beats, impairing its ability to fill with blood. This is a primary cause of diastolic heart failure, a condition where the heart cannot fill properly, leading to a backup of pressure into the lungs, causing shortness of breath and fluid retention. The heart is, quite literally, being worked to death against the rigid pipes it is forced to pump into. Downstream, the damage is just as severe. The high-pressure pulse wave travels at a much higher velocity through the stiff arteries. It hammers into the delicate microvasculature of the body's most sensitive organs. You trace its path to the kidneys. The fragile filtering units, the glomeruli, are being subjected to this relentless barotrauma, this pressure-induced injury. Over years, this leads to progressive scarring and destruction of the kidney tissue, a condition known as nephrosclerosis. The kidneys lose their ability to effectively filter waste from the blood and regulate blood pressure, creating a vicious cycle where damaged kidneys contribute to even higher blood pressure, which in turn causes more kidney damage. The body's filtration system is slowly and inexorably failing under the relentless physical stress. You see a similar process in the brain. The small arteries deep within the brain tissue are also damaged by this pulsatile stress, leading to a higher risk of lacunar strokes, small strokes caused by the blockage of these tiny vessels, which over time contribute to vascular dementia and cognitive decline. Now, you turn your attention back to the atherosclerotic plaques you saw forming within the coronary arteries. They have grown over the years. Some have become large and stable, but heavily calcified, turning sections of the arteries into rigid, rock-hard tubes. Others remain soft and inflamed, the so-called vulnerable plaques, which are time bombs waiting to rupture. The chronic inflammation, fueled by the ongoing chemical exposure and the dysregulated immune system, prevents these plaques from ever truly healing or stabilizing. The blood flowing past them is also different now. Chronic exposure to nicotine and other chemicals has made the blood platelets more sticky and more prone to aggregation. The balance between clotting and bleeding has been shifted decisively toward clotting. The blood itself has become hypercoagulable, primed and ready to form a thrombus at the slightest provocation, such as the rupture of one of those vulnerable plaques. You are witnessing a system that has been completely remodeled for catastrophic failure. The heart is an overworked, overgrown, and inefficient pump. The major arteries are rigid, brittle conduits. The smaller arteries are narrowed and damaged. The blood itself is sticky and prone to clotting. The entire cardiovascular system is a tinderbox. It may not be today or tomorrow, but the conditions for a heart attack, a stroke, or a major aneurysm have been meticulously established. This is the new compromised state. It is a state of compensated failure, where the body is just barely managing to function against the overwhelming burden of its own damaged hardware. The quiet that you observe here is not the quiet of health. It is the tense, precarious quiet before the inevitable collapse. The siege has not only breached the walls, it has fundamentally and permanently rebuilt the city's infrastructure to ensure its own eventual spectacular destruction. Every pulse you witness is a countdown. Leaving the failing architecture of the cardiovascular system, your investigation now turns back to the immune system, to observe the long-term, entrenched consequences of the chronic dysregulation you witnessed earlier. The initial state of confused, hyperactive inflammation has now matured into a deeply ingrained pattern of systemic dysfunction. You are not observing a temporary state of alert, but a new permanent and pathological character of the body's defense network. This is the immune system in a state of chronic civil unrest, where the distinction between self and other has been irrevocably blurred, and the mechanisms of control have been eroded. The result is a body that is perpetually at war with itself, while its ability to defend against genuine external threats continues to degrade. You focus on the lymph nodes, the command and control centers of the immune system, where immune cells are educated and deployed. In a healthy state, these are sites of calm surveillance. Now you observe that they are in a state of constant, low-grade activation. The chronic influx of inflammatory signals and cellular debris from damaged tissues throughout the body keeps these nodes humming with unnecessary activity. T cells and B cells, the specialized soldiers of the adaptive immune system, are being continuously stimulated. This leads to a state of clonal exhaustion. Imagine an army whose elite troops are sent on endless, pointless patrols and drills. Over time, they become fatigued and lose their effectiveness. The pool of naive T cells, those fresh recruits ready to respond to a brand new pathogen like a novel virus, is severely depleted. The immune system has a limited memory and repertoire, and it is being squandered on this internal, self-generated noise. The body's ability to mount a strong, specific response to new infections or to vaccines is significantly impaired. This state of exhaustion and confusion paves the way for a more sinister outcome: the development of full-blown autoimmune diseases. You witness the initial friendly fire, the misguided attacks on healthy tissue. Now, years later, you see these skirmishes have escalated into organized campaigns. You observe the joints where you see T cells and antibodies specifically targeting the synovial lining. The result is rheumatoid arthritis, a chronic, painful, and deforming inflammatory condition. You shift your view to the gut, where a similar self-directed assault on the intestinal lining contributes to conditions like Crohn's disease. The immune system is no longer just confused. It has developed a persistent pathological memory of attacking its own tissues. These conditions are not temporary. They are chronic, lifelong diseases that are the direct consequence of the immune system's long-term exposure to the chemical siege and its resulting dysregulation. The body's protectors have become its most relentless tormentors. Simultaneously, the weakened surveillance function of the immune system has dire consequences in another arena: the fight against cancer. A healthy immune system is constantly performing immune surveillance, identifying and destroying cancerous cells as they arise. The same T cells and natural killer, NK cells that fight viruses are also expert at recognizing and eliminating malignant cells. But in this state of chronic inflammation and exhaustion, their effectiveness is crippled. You return to that single cell where you witnessed the DNA mutation, the first step toward cancer. Now that cell has divided into a small cluster, a microtumor. A healthy immune system would likely detect and destroy this nascent cancer. But here you see the patrolling immune cells either fail to recognize the threat or mount a response that is too weak and ineffective to eliminate it. The cancer is allowed to grow, to establish its own blood supply, and to eventually metastasize, spreading to other parts of the body. The chemical aerosol not only causes the initial cancer-inducing mutations, it also systematically dismantles the very system that is supposed to be the last line of defense against it. It is a perfect two-pronged assault. The impact of this compromised immunity is visible even on the surface of the body. You observe the skin. The chronic inflammation manifests as a poor, sallow complexion. The oxidative stress damages collagen and elastin fibers in the skin, just as it did in the arteries, leading to premature aging, wrinkles, and a loss of elasticity. The skin's ability to heal itself from cuts and wounds is impaired. The local immune cells in the skin are less effective, and the compromised blood flow from the damaged cardiovascular system means that the necessary nutrients and oxygen for repair are in short supply. A simple cut that would heal quickly in a healthy body now lingers, prone to infection. The entire organism is brittle, its resilience worn down by the ceaseless internal conflict and the degradation of its repair and defense mechanisms. The body has lost its robustness, its ability to weather the small injuries and insults of daily life. You are witnessing a system that has fundamentally lost its sense of self. The intricate signaling pathways that allow the immune system to distinguish friend from foe have been hopelessly corrupted. The constant inflammatory noise drowns out the signals of real danger while creating phantom threats everywhere. This new compromised state is one of profound vulnerability. The body is susceptible to infections. It is a fertile ground for the development of cancer, and it is actively engaged in tearing itself apart through autoimmune processes. The chemical siege has achieved a strategic masterpiece of sabotage. By turning the immune system against itself, it has ensured that the body will continue to inflict damage upon itself long after the initial chemical exposure. The war is now self-sustaining, a vicious cycle of damage leading to inflammation, which leads to more damage. The quiet you perceive is the quiet of a system that has accepted this pathology as its new reality, a state of managed, perpetual decline. The final stage of your journey is not a crescendo of crisis. There is no heart attack, no final, gasping breath. Instead, you are witness to the quiet aftermath, the grim peace that settles after a long and devastating war. You observe the body as a whole, an organism that has not been defeated in a single battle, but has been fundamentally and irreversibly altered by a prolonged siege. It has reached a new equilibrium, a state of chronic, compensated dysfunction, This is the new compromised baseline, a quiet of exhausted repair mechanisms, established pathologies, and a future defined by the damage that has already been done. The story does not end with a bang, but with the somber, enduring reality of the consequences. You see a body that is chronically hypoxic, subtly starved of oxygen. The scarred and stiffened lung tissue you first observed can no longer perform gas exchange with its former efficiency. Every breath brings in a little less oxygen and removes a little less carbon dioxide. To compensate, the respiratory rate is subtly elevated, even at rest. The body must work harder just to maintain the bare minimum of oxygen saturation in the blood. This chronic oxygen debt places a strain on every metabolic process in every cell, contributing to a pervasive sense of fatigue and a diminished capacity for physical exertion. The simple act of climbing a flight of stairs now requires a conscious effort, a reminder of the permanent damage to the lungs' architecture. The cardiovascular system, as you have seen, is a roadmap of this new reality. The blood pressure is chronically elevated, managed now not by the body's natural systems, but by a regimen of medications that artificially relax the blood vessels or reduce the heart's workload. The heart beats with the strained rhythm of a hypertrophied, stiffened muscle, perpetually at risk of descending into failure or a fatal arrhythmia. The arteries are rigid conduits, their linings scarred with atherosclerotic plaques that represent permanent localized threats of occlusion. The circulatory system is no longer a resilient, adaptable network, but a brittle and precarious plumbing system, operating on borrowed time and under constant chemical management. The risk of a sudden, catastrophic cardiovascular event is not a possibility. It is a statistical probability, woven into the very fabric of this new compromised state. The brain operates under a similar shadow. The neurological reward pathways, so violently hijacked to create the initial addiction, are now permanently altered. The brain's baseline level of dopamine and its sensitivity to natural rewards are diminished. This manifests as a state of anhedonia, a reduced ability to experience pleasure from normal, healthy activities. The world seems a little more grey, a little less vibrant. This, combined with the compromised cholinergic system, contributes to a persistent state of low mood, anxiety, and cognitive fog. The user is tethered to the chemical not for pleasure, but to escape this state of engineered dysphoria, a prison built from their own reprogrammed neurons. The command center has settled into a long, low-intensity state of siege, its functions permanently impaired, its outlook bleak. The body's resilience is gone. The immune system, caught in its cycle of chronic inflammation and exhaustion, cannot mount an effective defense. A common cold lingers for weeks. A bout of flu carries the risk of progressing to a life-threatening pneumonia. The risk of developing cancer is not just elevated, it is a constant lurking presence, as the body's compromised surveillance mechanisms may fail to detect the next malignant cell. The process of aging has been dramatically accelerated. The oxidative stress has taken its toll on every tissue, from the wrinkled skin to the brittle bones to the cataract-clouded lens of the eye. The body appears years, or even decades, older than its chronological age, a testament to the cumulative burden of the chemical assault. What you are observing is the essence of chronic disease. It is not a temporary illness to be overcome, but a new state of being. The body has adapted to the presence of damage. It has incorporated the pathology into its daily operations. The inflammation, the high blood pressure, the insulin resistance, the immune dysfunction, these are no longer acute events, but the defining features of the body's internal environment. The journey ends here, in this quiet, compromised state. It is a testament to the insidious nature of the chemical siege. It did not seek to cause a single dramatic collapse. Its goal was always more patient, more thorough. It sought to systematically dismantle the body's defenses, corrupt its operating systems, and rewrite its fundamental architecture until the damage became the new normal. You have been a forensic witness to the unveiling of a silent, systemic assault, a journey that ends not with a resolution, but with a somber, irreversible change. The war is over, not because a victor was declared, but because the territory itself has been transformed into a reflection of the conflict, a permanent monument to the siege that was waged within.